But everything is on edge as well as being on the table. And this is a genuinely perilous moment. Let's hear from the leader of the Golos party in the Ukrainian parliament, Kira Rudik, who gave me her reaction to the proposed deal.
It's not a surprise for us, right? When we heard first about the 28-point plan, we were asking, how would President Trump, who was not able to get Russia to a first step of any negotiation, to a ceasefire, how would he push, pressure, whatever, Putin into agreeing to any sort of plan? Because right now, when everybody discussing these peace negotiations, here on the ground in Ukraine, nothing has changed. Russia continues attacking us. People are dying at the front line, and people are dying in their beds in the peaceful cities because Russia continues attacking. So the question that everybody is asking is not answered. What is the leverage to make Putin agree to a peace deal? Right now, there is no reason for him to end the war. However, he has a reason to drag the negotiations to evade the sanctions that President Trump threatened him with. So this is why I'm not very optimistic.
Isn't it the sad truth that Putin thinks he's winning the war at the moment, because he is? Ukraine is losing an awful lot of people on the front line, people leaving, literally walking away or deserting, and the Russian assault goes on and on. They appear to be able to find yet more people for their so-called meat grinder. You're a smaller country and you are struggling.
Russia is, of course, bigger, and it's an authoritarian regime where they can get as many people as they need. We are a democracy, and of course we are struggling. We always knew that it was a David versus Goliath situation, and it didn't become much better. However, if you look at the territorial gains and losses, for example, between 2023 and right now, they're not much different. And this gives us lots of hope that the political promises of our allies will become additional weapons in our hands, and so we can continue defending ourselves. Look, Andrew, there is no other nation that wants this war to end more than us. We have all paid an enormous price, an ultimate price, to be where we are right now. But we cannot do it at any cost. Because let me ask you this: if Russia doesn't plan to attack us in the nearest future after the peace deal, why would they care how many people we have in our army? Why would anybody care how many people we have in our army? Why is this point even there if nobody plans to attack Ukraine in the nearest future?
Because they want you completely under their control, I think, is the real answer to that question. A lot of people thought that the 28-point plan announced by Washington was basically written by Moscow, or a lot of it was written by Moscow. And when President Zelenskyy addressed the Ukrainian people, he said there was a very, very hard choice between humiliation on the one hand and losing Ukraine's biggest ally. It sounded to me as if he was prepared to agree to certain aspects of this peace proposal, however painful they may be.
Andrew, it was never a question for us to choose between our partners and our dignity. We have made our choice in 2022 when the situation was much worse. We remember how we were talking when Russians were surrounding Kyiv, and we didn't have so many allies as we have right now. So yes, situation is dire, but we are not at the point where we can just give up. We didn't do it in 2022. We do not intend to do it right now. However, I think we should continue these negotiations because there is one positive note that is happening. For the first time in a while, probably in history, the United States are saying that they will provide security guarantees, the real security guarantees, not the Budapest Memorandum security guarantees. We do not know what that means, but at least this is in this 27, 19-point plan, whatever. And this is something that can be a breakthrough because ending the war, knowing that Russia will be just waiting for us to become weaker and then attacking us again, is not something that we can achieve and we can approve here. But actually having all our partners working together, providing the security guarantees for this territory that Ukraine controls right now, I think this is something that brings some hope.
Kira, can I ask you directly? Again, President Zelenskyy warned of a very difficult or harsh winter ahead for Ukraine. Do you think your country can last the winter and into next year?
I want to remind you that In 2022, people were not giving us more than 2 or 3 days. Andrew, right now I'm talking to you on a diesel generator. I'm in Kiev. I have electricity for 3, sometimes 5 hours a day. It's very hard. But is it hard to the point where we can just give up? Is it even fair to the people who are fighting at the front line, to the people who lost their relatives in this war? I think we still have it in ourselves. No matter how hard it is, we are still a free country. We are fighting for our survival, and we just need to push together, and especially having our partners behind us. Because what I think we are not talking enough, what would happen if we lose?
Very courageous words, and I'm sure everybody listening will agree with them. But can I ask you about one more difficult issue, which is President Zelenskyy and this corruption scandal around the nuclear power plant? All sorts of stories coming out, and I think an awful lot of your fellow citizens are very, very angry with the regime over it.
I am angry too, because same as our citizens, I'm sitting without the electricity, and I have heard and have seen on those videos how people were taking cash somewhere. Yeah. And it is incredibly annoying. And President Zelenskyy will be defined by his reaction to this scandal, because he can either go ahead and dismiss the government, and we can try and form a new parliamentary coalition, because we cannot have elections right now, but we can propose a new government that will consist of new people who will be working for Ukraine. Or president can try to pretend that nothing happened, and then it will be much harder for Ukraine again to continue putting our trust in him. Since the beginning of full-scale invasion, I was supporting president, and we were all working as one team. But there is red lines here as well. And again, stealing on energy sector, stealing in the military purchases is something that we just, this is something where our survival depends on it. And this is why we are still waiting for the president to do the right thing.
And if he fails to do that, do you think he's the right person to carry on leading Ukraine?
Well, we cannot elect a different president at this time, but the trust to him will definitely go down. And I hope that he realizes that.
Kira, thank you very much for talking to LBC tonight, and our very best wishes to you all.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
Kira Rudik there. Now, it's very hard, indeed nigh on impossible, to truly understand what's going on in President Trump's head. But what do the events of the last few days tell us about where the president currently stands on the war in Ukraine and his relationship with both Putin and Zelenskyy? Daniel Fried is the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Europe. He was also at one time the U.S. ambassador to Poland, and he played a central role in coordinating the West's sanctions against Russia after the 2014 aggression against Ukraine. He joins me now. Mr. Fried, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Can I start off by putting something to you, with a question mark at the end, which is that Donald Trump saw that President Zelenskyy, right now for different reasons, was in a very weak position, seized his moment and has pounced?
I don't know the origins of this latest peace proposal. It may have come from Donald Trump. I think it more likely that Special Envoy Steve Witkoff with Kirill Dmitriev, his Russian counterpart, cooked this up, got a kind of general blessing from Donald Trump, and jammed it. So it broke last week. And we've been suddenly off to the races, moving very fast.
And everybody has been taken by surprise, including all the European leaders. They didn't see this coming. And a general sense of shock has spread right through Kiev as well.
Well, that's right. Look, can we just stipulate that the original U.S. proposal, both in the form and the substance, was what we call in the U.S. a hot mess? All right, let's just stipulate that. But my reaction was, as a former diplomat, how can I make this work? What can I do with this? And there, the Ukrainians and the Europeans have reacted well, I think, as has Secretary Rubio. That is, instead of throwing up their hands and complaining, they tried to take this mess of the 28 points and move it in the right direction so it could be the basis for a sustainable peace. Now, that's an uphill battle. because the Russians helped shape this at the beginning. But the Geneva talks yesterday seem to have done quite a bit of good. And so my question is not how bad the origins were, but how good we can make this if we're finally working together.
That's a very positive way of looking at it. It's been suggested to me from inside the British government that having Marco Rubio there at the centre is one of the silver linings. In other words, he is one of the most positive and optimistic figures that the Americans could be providing.
Well, absolutely. He is, how shall I put this, a kind of Reaganite within the Trump administration. And he's not the only one, by the way. There are a number in the administration and in Trump world who believe in, how shall I say this, the free world. And they think it is in American interest to see Russia fail to conquer Ukraine, and I agree with them. It's good to have the British involved, by the way. I know Jonathan Powell from some previous incarnations, first rate. So you now have the Europeans talking to the Americans, talking to the Ukrainians, and you apparently have a much better draft that's on the table, though it's not finalized. Rough days lie ahead, but at least we're no longer in a complete meltdown as we appeared to be Saturday night.
And the big problem seems to be obviously persuading the Russians that a modified deal, modified by the Europeans to give Ukraine a little bit of security going forward, won't be acceptable to the Kremlin. In other words, whether you can get a deal which protects Ukraine and Putin will accept has always been the conundrum that President Trump has been wrestling with. And it's not clear that that conundrum's been resolved.
Well, I think it's clear that it hasn't been resolved. That is, this is the tactical mistake the American negotiators made. We allowed the Kremlin, through Kirill Dmitriev, to shape the first draft. Then we have to negotiate the final draft with the Russians so they get two bites at the apple. Now, I don't know how Witkoff does real estate business, but that doesn't strike me as a very good negotiating tactic. So we're starting out from behind and playing catch up. But I agree that having Rubio in the center is very good, and there are serious people around Rubio. There are people part of the administration and part of Trump world who want to do the right thing because it's in America's interest to do the right thing.
I said right at the beginning of our conversation, it's hard to read President Trump, and it may be impossible. But I'm really struck by the change in tone since the summer when he appeared to be very irritated, borderline angry with President Putin, thought he was not a fair actor and was threatening all sorts of oil sanctions, to where we are now. He seems to have gone right back to the beginning.
Well, you have a basis for that complaint, let us say. However, we know that Trump doesn't stay in one place. We also know that his MO is to put pressure, maximum pressure, on whatever party he wants to push at the moment. That is not necessarily a sign of where he ends up. So Trump wanted Ukraine to sign on to his initiative. So he puts pressure on Ukraine. Now the Ukrainians have signed on in principle to the Trump initiative. So it may be that once we come up with a decent draft, the Russians will have to decide whether to be jerks and simply try to negotiate everything or negotiate in earnest. If they are jerks, and the initial signs are they're likely to be, then Trump may turn around and put pressure on them. It wasn't just words with Trump. A couple of weeks ago, those new sanctions on the big Russian oil companies, Lukoil and Rosneft, were serious. So Trump can put pressure on the Russians. He has the options. Look, as you hear, I'm trying to make the best of a bad start, but it was my professional instincts that kicked in, and I asked myself, don't simply describe the stink bomb that's on the table. Try to fix it, and that's how I'm approaching this problem.
A stink bomb, a hot mess. Mr. Fried, thank you very much for talking to LBC tonight.